Back in 1990, of course, there was still the Soviet Union, and Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. What was happening in 1990, on February 9th, 1990 in particular, was the process of German reunification. The Berlin Wall had come down in November 1989, and the negotiations between the United States and Germany on one side and the Soviet Union on the other side on the implications of the end of the Berlin Wall were underway. Strangely enough, of course, people don't really know this and didn't even know it at the time. Even as late as 1990, essentially World War II had not ended. There was an occupation of Germany, and the Soviets legally were occupying Eastern Germany, and the Western occupation was the merger of three occupation zones, the US, British, and French, and they had become the Federal Republic of Germany. With the fall of the Berlin Wall and the peace that Gorbachev was bringing to the region and the end of the Cold War, Helmut Kohl, the German chancellor, immediately took up the cause of German reunification. That required the Soviet legal approval. Basically, finally, in 1990, the end of World War II, which in terms of fighting had ended in 1945, but without a treaty. And negotiations ensued. And the point that the US and Germany made was that allow unification to take place was the request to Mikhail Gorbachev, and we will not take advantage of the Soviet Union and its goodwill in doing that. And specifically, we will not aim to take advantage in security or military terms. And what James Baker III said on February 9th, 1990, specifically, is that in the context of German reunification, NATO will not move 1 inch eastward. And it wasn't only Baker saying this, it was Hans-Dietrich Genscher, the foreign minister of Germany, reiterating this point. And there are tapes and there are documents, and this wasn't a casual statement or a trial balloon. This was part of a legal negotiation to end World War II and to proceed with the peaceful reunification of Germany. Sad to say, the United States cheated on this soon enough. Already by 1992, the Soviet Union had ended. Russia was what is called the continuation state, not just the successor state, but the continuation that would have all of the rights and responsibilities that the Soviet Union had. It's also, therefore, in legal terms, the repository of a whole raft of agreements on arms control, on especially around nuclear weapons, testing of nuclear weapons, and so forth. Sometimes it's called the successor state, but even more precisely, it's the continuation state. But the United States, being the United States, said, well, but we run the show now, and now we'll do what we want. And the idea inside the Defense Department at the time, where Richard Cheney was the Secretary of Defense, and later, of course, he would be Vice President starting in 2001, and his deputy was Paul Wolfowitz, they became the start of what later became known as the neoconservative foreign policy. And what that meant specifically was the belief and the pursuit of a policy in which the United States would claim, aim, and act to continue to secure dominance over all the rest of the world. And the term that was used was full spectrum dominance, meaning in all battlegrounds, in all potential war zones or conflict zones, and across military technologies, across air, water, Navy, Air Force, on the land, and in other domains as well, economic and financial. If one goes back to read this neocon new view of America in the world, it is American exceptionalism, but it is American hubris to the ultimate degree. Suddenly, the United States was going to run the world. Now, when Clinton came to office on January 20th, 1993, he was informed, as all our presidents are, by the deep state, that is by the permanent establishment, by the military-industrial complex, by the CIA, and so forth. Here's the plan, and get on with it. And by 1994, the Clinton administration had agreed to a strategy to expand NATO, not just to the immediate east, which was the first wave of expansion that covered 3 countries, Hungary, Poland, and the Czech Republic, but eventually all the way to Russia's border and maybe surrounding Russia, and in particular surrounding Russia in the Black Sea region. The idea already formulated in 1994 and then spelled out in print in 1997 by Zbigniew Brzezinski was that the entire Black Sea region would become a NATO region. The Black Sea would become a NATO lake, in effect, surrounding Russia. If you look at the map, that means Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey, and Georgia. And it happened that to fulfill that plan in 2008, a formal commitment was made of membership of Ukraine and Georgia. Well, suffice it to say that this did not sit well with the Russians from the very beginning. It was a cheat, and it is a cheat, and it's such a typical American cheat. It's hubris, it's self-regard, it's we love freedom and motherhood and democracy, and we couldn't do anything bad anyway, and we're peace-loving, and we're defense-minded, and we don't threaten you, but we do have our way on anything we want to do. And that was the attitude. Madeleine Albright, Clinton's Secretary of State, used the phrase that we're the indispensable nation. Whoa, okay. So that went on, and then
implying, I guess, that other nations are dispensable. Is that?
That is exactly what it's saying. We are the indispensable nation. In 1999,
I should ask, just to be clear, sure. During this period as well of American cheating, was Russia doing any cheating?
No, Russia was basically on its back in economic crisis.
Yeah, they were in economic crisis at that time. Okay,
just to clarify. And in 1999, Clinton decided, because he was terribly advised and a person of poor judgment in general, in my view, that we would take on Serbia, and he invoked NATO to bomb Serbia 78 straight days, when Milosevic, the head of Serbia, not a nice guy, by the way, but Milosevic said right at the beginning, no, we don't need war, I agree. But Madeleine Albright wanted war. She really wanted to teach a lesson. She wanted to show how tough the United States is. And interestingly, she wanted to break Serbia into 2 parts, which is the result of that 78 days of war. Kosovo, which was an autonomous region in Serbia, declared itself independent. The United States recognized that. And lo and behold, the largest military base of NATO in Southeast Europe was put into Kosovo, the base called Bondesteel. Oh, this is so much defense, you can love it. So that was 1999. Then came 9/11. By then, Putin had come into office. He, and I know it from many people, was pro-European, actually explored maybe we could join NATO. It was kind of laughed off from the United States. When 9/11 came, he immediately said to President Bush, we'll help. We want to fight terrorism alongside you. We'll support you. This was not animosity. This was not aggression, quite the contrary. Then in 2002, what I regard as the kind of the unsung major part of this story was that the United States walked out of the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. And what is important to understand about this is now we're getting to the guts of survival, because we're talking about nuclear arms and one of the central pillars of the nuclear arms control framework. Russia was always afraid of a first strike, and the idea that a first strike could be deterred was that there would be survivability of Russia's nuclear arsenal and a possibility of Russia returning a strike on the United States, and that's what gave strategic stability, so-called mutual assured destruction.
Yeah,
then came the United States already during the Reagan period with Star Wars, but it wasn't feasible, and it was provocative but not feasible. But
although it didn't stop us spending well over $100 billion.
Absolutely, and part of the result of that was in 2002, the U.S. said, okay, now we can do anti-ballistic missiles, actually do them. The Aegis missile system that we've developed can take out some ballistic missiles, not the new ones that Russia has, by the way, not the Oreshniks, but some of the slower ones. In any event, when the U.S. walked out, that was a kind of body blow, I think, to peaceful cooperation between the U.S. and Russia, because Russia viewed that directly as a clear, unprecipitated threat to Russian survival. And Russia complained bitterly. In 2007, President Putin spoke at the Munich Security Conference and gave a very tough, very clear speech, not a threatening speech, saying, what are you doing? You know, this is, we wanted peace, we expected peace at the end of the Cold War, and it's been nothing but putting our noses up to it and one provocation after the other. And he said, don't go any farther. And then, of course, 2008, maybe to prove the point, at the NATO summit in Bucharest, President Bush Jr. insisted that the NATO countries commit to enlarging NATO to Ukraine and to Georgia. Now, what's important to understand is this was not a spur of the moment. It wasn't a George Bush, Dick Cheney thing, though, of course, they endorsed it. This was a project that went back to 30 years ago to 1994 and was spelled out vividly in the Grand Chessboard by Zbigniew Brzezinski, and also an article called A Grand Strategy for Eurasia in the Council of Foreign Affairs magazine, Foreign Affairs. Okay, so it's Council of Foreign Relations magazine, Foreign Affairs. Now, this was 2008.
Could we go back to right after pulling out of the treaty in 2002?
Yeah.
Wasn't that also followed fairly quickly by U.S. putting missile systems in Eastern Europe?
So the U.S. announced immediately that it would put these Aegis missiles first in Poland and then afterwards in Romania. It took several years to do. Putin kept making the point, how do we know what you're putting in those silos? Those could be nuclear first strikes. We don't know. And the Russian and the United States response was, none of your business. It's just the weirdest possible way to bring us closer and closer to conflict. And that is the American attitude. It's the literal position. It's none of your business what we do. We are the United States of America. And as Obama famously joked, but it's no joke, it's obnoxious and it brings us closer to war. Russia is a gas station with nuclear weapons was the slogan or the quip in the mid-2010s. Okay, so this came, and all of this was very provocative. One of the current European leaders at the time was not a head of state, but was in a senior position. I don't want to identify the person, and talked to me after the Bucharest summit, basically saying, what is your country doing? Everyone knows this is wrong, this is provocative, this is dangerous. And internally, we have learned, thanks to Julian Assange and his leak of a memo that our current CIA director, Bill Burns, sent to Condoleezza Rice in 2008 when Burns was U.S. ambassador to Russia, that expanding NATO to Ukraine could absolutely lead to a Ukrainian civil war. Russia didn't want that. Russia was against NATO in Ukraine across the political class. This wasn't because of Putin. This was a unanimous view of Russia. Stay away from our border and don't provoke an internal conflict in Ukraine. Now, my experience is the United States leaders never know how to leave well enough alone. This is the big failure of the United States. If the other side doesn't react, do more. If the other side threatens a nuclear escalation, say, that's a bluff, do more. This is the American attitude. We are the United States. You are nothing. And that was manifest after 2008. Now, the Ukrainians, interestingly, did not want NATO. And the opinion surveys up and down until 2014 show a large majority of Ukrainians saying, please stay out, just don't make things more complicated. And in 2009, they voted in a new president, Viktor Yanukovych, who became president in 2010. And his foreign policy was neutrality for Ukraine, which incidentally was the foreign policy announced at the time of Ukraine's independence in 1991. So Ukraine announced independence and neutrality, and the U.S. view of neutrality is to hate neutrality. The U.S. hates neutrality more than it hates overt opposition. If you say you're neutral, that really means you're against us. We don't allow for neutrality. This is America's, again, another kind of our stupidity.
It's either you're with us or against
Exactly.
us. You can't be neither.
In late 2013, it really was a kerfuffle that was made into a grand crisis. Yanukovych delayed signing an agreement with the European Union to open what would be a 10-year process for membership. And he delayed it because Putin said, don't do this without bringing us into these negotiations. We have a currency union with you, not a currency union, we have a customs union, excuse me. In other words, we share common tariffs, we have open trade. You can't just decide you're going to join EU without some implication for Russia's trade, and we need to be party to this discussion. Well, for Europe and especially the United States, the main attitude towards Russia every moment is, who the hell are you? This has nothing to do with you. So Yanukovych postponed signing this roadmap, which would have been 10 years of negotiations, by the way, so it wasn't anything imminent. And then out came people pouring into the streets. This is partly real and partly contrived. The US knows how to do this. It's became known as a color revolution. And this is actually the work of the CIA, the National Republican Institute, the National Democratic Institute, a number of NGOs. This has happened in many, many places. It's a game. It's a geopolitical game, because who runs the media? Suddenly, new TV networks overnight spring up, new newspapers, new social media. Who's paying for all of that? Let me give you a hint. It's got three initials, USA. And I know some of that firsthand.
Well, I was going to ask, often one could say if it looks like a duck and walks like a duck, it's a duck, but it's nice if you can also know it's a duck. So this has the earmarks of things that were done in many places by the
Yes.
U.S. But is there documented evidence about the 2014?
Well, yes, in several ways. But one thing to say is, suppose on the January 6th insurrection in D.C. In 2021, that a number of leading Russian politicians had come and spoken to the crowd and said, "We're with you, we're with you." And a Chinese senator came and said, "We're with you." That would be taken as sufficient evidence to say, "Get the hell out of here. You have no business being here." They'd be on a plane immediately. The U.S. senators, Lindsey Graham, who I regard as one of the great jerks of our republic, John McCain, our Assistant Secretary of State at the time, Victoria Nuland, out handing out cookies to the demonstrators, famously bragging about how the U.S. has invested $5 billion in projects to build Ukrainian democracy and so forth. That is all without any doubt. I can tell you also, Lawrence, that I happened to be in Kiev, not at the moment of the coup, which was February 22nd, 2014, but a few weeks afterwards, because the new government called me and said, "Would you come talk to us about our economic crisis?" And I went, and I was shown around the Maidan where people were still milling around several weeks later. And I was told how much money, American money, had gone to this demonstration, to this kiosk, to this setup. So it was, to me personally, that I heard some of this.
And that was a surprise at the time. That was a surprise to you. You went there not knowing about essentially.
Yeah, for those of you who are listening, I'm putting my finger in my mouth because it was so disgusting to hear this. I hated it. And I went home that evening after meeting with the prime minister and didn't go back to talk to them because I don't want to be part of a U.S.-led coup.
Okay.
Or a U.S.-participated coup.
Yeah.
There are many, many more things to say about the Maidan, but the United States should keep out of other countries' domestic politics, period. Just like we expect the other countries to stay out of our politics. It's a kind of basic golden rule. Do not do internally to other people's politics what you would not want to have them do to your politics. But we don't follow any semblance of a golden rule. We are the United States of America. We do what we want. That's the overall mantra of all of this. So as soon as that happened, events accelerated. The war started on February 22nd, 2014. We say that it started 8 years later, but it started then because that's when the fighting started. Immediately, the eastern two oblasts of Ukraine, Lugansk and Donetsk, had units of the Ukraine military break away and declare people's republics of those two oblasts. These are the Russian ethnic areas. And the ones that seize power are Western Ukrainians with a long lineage, by the way, of Russophobia, basically. And this is what Bill Burns was saying in 2008, that this could stoke a civil war, actually. And a civil war began. Putin also immediately organized, you could say it's a grab, or you could call it a referendum, or whatever you want, but he immediately organized a process to claim Crimea. And this is also very important to understand and very basic in this story. Crimea, the peninsula in the Black Sea, has been home to Russia's naval fleet in the Black Sea since 1783. It was established as the home of Russia's Black Sea fleet by Catherine the Great. And for centuries, then, it was the home of Russia's very important Black Sea fleet. This was not lost on Western leaders. The war between Britain and France on one side and Russia on the other side from 1853 to 1856, which we call the Crimean War, was a war launched by Lord Palmerston and Napoleon III together to push Russia out of the Black Sea. And in fact, there was 19 years after the end of the Crimean War in which Russia's naval fleet was banished from the Black Sea. And this was part of big power games or big power politics. So Putin said immediately, we're not going to let NATO, after this coup, take Crimea. Are you kidding? And so he took it back. And it makes perfect sense. And that's when the war started, that was taken back. He could say, and the Russians do say, and it's arguable, that there was an overwhelming referendum for Crimea to become part of Russia. You could say it's just the most brutal realpolitik, which is the United States was trying to make a grab, the same way Palmerston had 160 years earlier, and Putin was having none of it. However you interpret it, that's when the war started.